Okay, so there's two kinds of borders that every nation has, if you think about it. Two kinds. So one is physical, and the other is cultural. They're your actual borders. They're what defines you. They're what makes up who you are, where you are as a nation. You have the physical geographic border that makes up the landmass of a nation. It's the ground that has a legal and geopolitical standing. It's the dirt and water, and you can touch it with your hands and you can build on it. You can live on it. You can tend it. Steward it for future generations. But then there's the other border. That's the cultural border made up by the mores, traditions, history, lineage, faith, and philosophies of a people. All wrapped up together, they form the cultural border, the fabric of the society of people that make up the nation. Both borders are designed to give security and identity to a nation, and both of them have to be protected. So let's talk first about what happens when a nation loses control of its geographic and cultural borders. I've seen some social media posts likening modern America with ancient Rome. I mean, that's okay as long as we're talking about Roma Victor. I mean, the great Roman Empire that stretched from one end of the known world to another. But I do not want to be categorized in that vainglorious downfall that many refer to as the fall of Rome, the end of an era when the great empire just doddered its way into obscurity. Not at all. Which means that we need to take some lessons from the fall of Rome. So historians wrestle with the factors that caused Rome to fall, but there are a few that they agree on, and I got to tell you, when I read through the list and compare it to where we are right now as a nation, I get this kind of eerie feeling that the fall of Rome is like some sort of deja vu. So here are just a few of the factors that led to the fall of Rome and the great Roman Empire. One of the most prevalent theories is that the weakening of the Roman society was done by the mass migrations of people coming across Europe who were seeking out another location to live. Literally, whole tribes and subcultures just up and moved and occupied the territories of Rome and began to draw from Rome's resources without any predicate or permission. Some would say that Rome no longer had borders, that the lack of cohesion and say-so over whoever was and was not occupying space within the Roman Empire had somehow caused a massive degradation of logistical and national capabilities. Sound familiar? Yeah, it does, unfortunately. Right now, we're seeing literally millions per year flooding across our southern border unchecked. We're not by any stretch a closed nation. We were built by immigrants seeking a better life, but yet we, as a nation without borders, cease to be a geographic nation. And even political, our entity itself, if left unchecked, that mass migration can result in the loss of so much to include our political and cultural identity. That, by the way, is one of the other intangible borders that makes up the nation, like I said. It's not just the geographic border, it's the intangible, sort of the cultural identity border, if you will, that makes up a nation. When the people know who they are and what they stand for, then they can rally to the cause, they can support the effort, they desire the best for their country. But when the culture bleeds away and millions occupy space without any care or concern for the identity of the nation they've just migrated to, well, then the culture itself becomes weak. The fabric of the nation can lose hold. The Romans saw it. The Romans saw it in a lot of ways. One of the most obvious was in their great military legions. The Roman military eventually swelled up with Germanic Goths and other barbarians, so much so that Romans began using the Latin word barbarus in place of soldier. They had little or no loyalty to the empire itself, and many of the barbarians who sacked the city of Rome later brought down the Western Empire. They earned their military stripes and experience while serving in the Roman legions. So what I'm saying is that a lack of cultural identity by mass migrations of people who don't identify with the place which they've migrated to, that in itself can destroy the fabric of society. It's not just the geographic border. But so yeah, I see these indicators and I look at history. And I realize that the fact that I love this nation, this United States of America, even the state that I live in, Alabama, my community, means that I'm willing to stand. We have to. I don't want to be a blot on history that makes future generations wonder where we went, like the fall of Rome, where they speculate on the things that caused it to fall. Look, the United States of America does have an emerging identity crisis. We've lost control of our borders. The Biden administration has effectively invited millions upon millions of people who took no citizenship tests, they passed no vetting to ensure their desire to work and be productive. Many of them don't have sponsors tying them to a home. Some came here with criminal records from their home countries. Some will be producers, I get it. But many are just takers, at least at first. And it strains the resources of the very government that left the back door open and the light on for them. In effect, the Biden administration has openly flooded our physical borders with illegal migration, at the same time taking an axe to our cultural border that makes us a unique people. And it's a mess. But I got to tell you, despite the fact that we can see that happening right now, you have to look at it and go, well, what would they do? Well, I got news. There was a time when the U.S. government did not take kindly to having our borders breached. I'm not talking about the people. I'm talking about the government itself. Did not take kindly to having our borders breached. So let me work an analogy here with you for a minute. What if I told you that your neighbor's house right across the street was being threatened? Armed intruders, squatters, vandals, and thieves, you name it. You look out the window and you know immediately that there's a threat right next door. What would you do? Would you sit idly by? Would you gawk out the windows and take videos on your cell phone? Would you call 911? Or would you arm yourself and go next door? I mean, it's an issue that I hope none of you have to face. Having your home violated, your community violated, is more than disconcerting. It's an invasion of privacy. It's the taking away of your sense of security. But what if I told you that the reason why your neighbor's house was being invaded and you were having to see all that happen was because your government had invited those people in? That a government policy itself was actually incentivizing people to go into your neighbor's house and just do as they please? What if the neighbor's crisis was because, I don't know, pick one, the mayor had invited armed intruders, squatters, vandals, and thieves to come to your town? What if the mayor had said to the armed intruders, squatters, vandals, and thieves that our house is your house, mi casa su casa, and they took him at his word, literally, and they came to your neighborhood with ill intent, but with an invitation? Does it sound far-fetched? It's not. It's exactly what has been happening on the southern border of our United States. It's exactly what's been going on for the past 4 years of the Biden administration. An incursion by people who have literally been told, our house is your house, come on in. I've watched videos of ranchers on the southern border who say they can no longer even take the trash out without being armed. Communities on our southern border have been devastated by illegal immigration. Crime across the country tied to illegal aliens is a daily news headline, and unfortunately, too many people are getting numb to it. It's heartbreaking. But they were invited. And despite all that we've pushed for, despite the obvious impact that illegal immigration had on the recent red wave elections for Trump and others around the nation, the fact remains that there are some elected leaders who still don't get it. They can't read the room. Like the mayor of Boulder, Colorado. He just said he would be willing to go to jail if necessary to resist Trump's incoming border security policies. What a knucklehead. Multiple blue state governors say they have no intention to cooperate. They're going to continue their sanctuary policies to include the border state of Arizona via our liberal governor Katie Hobbs, or the city council of Los Angeles, who voted just like a week or so ago to declare themselves a sanctuary city. Armed intruders, squatters, vandals, and thieves, they still have an open invitation from much of the elected Democrat leadership. But look, these are our neighbors. Other states and cities, those are the neighbors of our states and cities, and they are continuing to face this crisis. And a change is not just needed. It is imperative. It is desperate in some places. It's about our geographic borders and about our cultural borders, and about preserving who we are as a people. But like I said a minute ago, in the past, it was just the opposite. In the past, there was a time when the nation did not sit idly by. It was a question of national security, national sovereignty, neighbor watching out for neighbor, states watching out for states. There was a day when the nation did not sit idly by when the border was breached. Like I said, national security, national sovereignty, that means something. In 1916, American communities were suffering raids by Mexican bandits. The Mexican government, they were no help. Bandit leader Francisco Pancho Villa led an army of 1,500 guerrillas across the U.S. border against the small American town of Columbus, New Mexico. Villa and his men killed 19 people and left the town in flames. U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, he ordered General John Blackjack Pershing to lead 6,000 American troops into Mexico and capture Villa. That was one president who was not going to sit on his hands while danger came across our southern border. And I got to be honest with you, American sentiment for it was high, just like it is right now, to be honest. Cross-border damage and destruction was an outrage. an affront to our very being as a nation. There was one editorial of a cartoon at the time that became very famous by an artist named Clifford K. Berryman. It depicted Uncle Sam leaping the border saying, "I've had about enough of this." I mean, that was the line. Uncle Sam leaping over the border fence, yelling, "I've had about enough of this." In the iconic political cartoon, a smoldering home lay in the background as Uncle Sam chased Villa. Yeah, 1916. President Woodrow Wilson called, and the states answered the call. Thousands of National Guardsmen, even Alabama's 167th Infantry, joined what became known as the punitive expedition of the U.S. Army. For the better part of 2 years, General Pershing and his soldiers, they chased the elusive Villa. The American troops had several bloody skirmishes with the rebels. It got very dicey. Relations between the U.S. and Mexico actually came to a head when Mexican troops, not just the bandits, but Mexican troops themselves, began to resist the U.S. forces. In February 2017, diplomatic efforts finally prevailed and stopped a war that was about to break out between the U.S. and Mexico. A war in the Western Hemisphere, can you imagine? On our border. It almost happened. But about that time, though, the war in Europe became the more pressing matter, and troops on the southern border were shipped out to the battlefields of World War I. Yeah, there was in fact a time when the federal government was willing to almost go to war to protect the southern border of the U.S., and the states answered. And I gotta be honest, nobody wants that. No rational person desires armed conflict. But the point is that a time existed when the U.S. government was not gonna sit idly by while borders community were suffering. Neighbors needed help, our border was threatened, our sovereignty was questioned, our cultural identity was at risk, and the government of the United States decided to answer. American communities back in 1916 had been harmed, and it was seen then as an invasion, no less really than what it is now. A destruction of the sense of security and sovereignty that every U.S. citizen has a right to expect and to demand their government ensures. Armed intruders, squatters, vandals, and thieves coming across the border were not welcomed. As one, as a nation, we responded to our neighbors' distress because it was our geographic border, it was our culture, and we were not going to just give it away. But it's not been that way for the past 4 years, has it? No, not at all. In what seems to be a blatant and intentional effort, really, to blur the lines of national borders, the Biden administration has wholly failed to provide even a hint of care and concern that any U.S. citizen ought to expect them to provide. I mean, taken into context, all of the actions and inactions of the Biden administration make the lack of security at our southern border clearly appear to be an intentional effort. I mean, think about it. Secretary Mayorkas testified to Congress that the border was secure. It was not at all true, and he knew it. Vice President Kamala Harris, she went to the border twice as borders are. That's it. Epic fail. Customs and Border Patrol officers, they were open about the fact that they were overwhelmed. Texas, the state of Texas, has been forced to take unilateral action. They called it Operation Lone Star. It's been crazy how much money they spent. I want to say well over $1 billion. And the Biden administration has also sued Texas for daring to try and stop the flow. Millions of illegal immigrants rushed the border and flooded into the United States. And the U.S. government, the response was not to leap the border saying, "I've had about enough of that." The response was to sue Texas for daring to try and stop it. But if we actually care about what happens at our neighbor's house, then you will agree that we must not sit idly by. We must venture across the property lines to assist our neighbors, because if the danger to our neighbor goes unchecked, eventually it comes to our house. Securing our borders, that's a core principle of good governments. Securing our culture, that's a part of it also. All of that is about what it means to provide for the common defense, support the general welfare, and ensure the domestic tranquility. Without a border, you have to question whether we really have a nation. Without a cultural identity, you have to question whether we really have a nation. And I'm telling you, armed intruders, squatters, vandals, and thieves, they still have open invitations from progressive leaders, but there was indeed a time when the president saw the border as something to fight for, when Uncle Sam was willing to leap the fence and say, "I've had about enough of this." It was seen back then as an invasion. Armed intruders, squatters, vandals, and thieves coming across the border, but yeah, back then they were not welcome. We resisted the efforts for mass migration to destroy who we were as a people. And like I said, it's not been that way the past 4 years in what seems to be a very blatant intentional effort. So how else can we say it? I'm pragmatic. I mean, I don't jump on conspiracy bandwagons. I look at facts. I assess. And I cannot deny what I'm seeing, that the Biden administration failed, not just because they didn't know how to do it, it's because they didn't want to do it. But a new day is coming. And I really do believe that this new day that we're about to see with the Trump administration coming on board is absolutely everything that it takes to make this country more secure. So if you, like me, actually care about what happens at your neighbor's house, then yeah, we will not be sitting idly by. And you know it. But I'm also glad, because we have to secure that southern border. And we have to secure our cultural identity and not allow the influx of illegal migration. And I clarify, illegal migration, because I'm not about to say we don't ever want people to come to our country again. We were built on that. I've got naturalized citizens in my family, but you know what? They love this country and they have embraced everything about what it takes to be an American. And they would fight for it the same as me. So yeah, secure the southern border, secure the cultural identity. We have those two borders, those two things that make us both geographically and culturally unique. We've done it before. We'll do it again. Because without a border, you have to question whether we really have a nation. That's my philosophy.